My name is Alex Barrett. I'm a filmmaker and critic. I directed a film called London Symphony that came out a few years ago, and wrote a film, or co-wrote a film called January, which is coming out in January. But today we're here to talk about Bassel and his film The Alleys. So let's have a round of applause for Bassel and his so Bassel, I'd like to start by taking you back to Thebe. For some of you may know that Bassel was a writer and producer on a film called Thebe that won the BAFTA for Outstanding British Debut, and was also nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at both the BAFTAs and at the Oscars. So that film was directed by Naji Abu Nawar. So I'm interested to kind of hear a little bit about what stage you got involved in that project, and whether there was any ever discussion of you directing it.
Sure. Well, yeah, Thebe started off as a, I had written a short script, 15 pages, so it would have been a 15-minute. And I sent that to Naji. I'd known Naji for a while then, and I sent him to see his thoughts on it, and he got really excited and said, we can flesh this out into a feature. It'll be super cheap. We'll go down to the desert. We'll make it on a tiny budget. And obviously, I was fresh out of university, and I got really excited by the idea. And so that's where it started. And eventually, we wrote 2 drafts together in the before moving down to Adiram, the desert. And these drafts really lacked authenticity. They lacked the real feel of the desert and Bedouin life. And so the next step was naturally we moved down and spent the time there developing the script, getting to know the community there, gaining their trust, doing acting workshops. Even though Naji and I had never done anything like that before, but we got a consultant to help out, but essentially ran them for 8 months, and did the location scouting and all that, and lived in this community for about a year, and then we filmed over 5 weeks, and the goal there was to essentially just get to the finish line, make the film that we'd all intended to make. It was really a labor of love, and everything that followed was just unexpected surprises. So, yeah.
And how did you feel at that point, sort of seeing someone else direct your work or direct your pages? And did that feed into the decision, do you think, to direct The Alleys yourself? I don't know if The Alleys was ever something that you considered for another director, or whether it was always something that you wanted to direct yourself.
I think I've always wanted to direct. I wanted to be a cinematographer first, but then there weren't that many films in Jordan being filmed, so I was like, okay, I guess I have to write one. But with Thebe, no, I think ever since inception, it was just always going to be a film that ever since I called Naji and he's like, we could turn this into a film. It just that wasn't ever brought up ever again. It just happened, and after moving down to Adiram, and the rest of the crew started trickling in. We went from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to eventually a whole crew. And because I was involved in every aspect, it never felt like, we were talking about this earlier, it never felt like somebody had taken a script or somebody had taken an idea and done something completely different with it, or surprised, or you're going to the premiere and you're watching something completely different from the original thought. Because we were involved in every aspect, everybody was. It was from casting to the acting workshops to the location scouts. It just became it was all expected, so it was all collectively done in some form or another. So again, it was really labor of love.
And so when it came to The Alleys, though, did you sort of instinctively know that you were going to direct this, or was there talks with Naji to kind of keep the same thing together? Or?
No, Naji, I sent him a couple of the drafts and helped him out, but no, from the get-go, I had known that this was something I wanted to do.
So tell me a little bit more about the actual genesis of The Alleys, then, sort of where the idea came from and how you decided to develop that.
Sure. So, essentially, I was really attracted to life in neighborhoods and in these these very tight-knit communities that are, everybody knows everybody. There's some, with that comes, there's the positives where, you can rely on each other, but also the intimacy creates a sort of claustrophobia and a constant sense that you're being, scrutinized by society. It's very immediate. You can hear people through walls, you can see people as you can so. And so that's the initial seed. That's where it all started. And as with everything, as with the research is essential to me, and I started doing a lot of, because I hadn't grown up in a neighborhood like that myself, and so I worked with a friend of mine, Mahmoud Abu Farha, who's from there over maybe 4 years. Obviously not consistently. I'd pop in, maybe we'd sketch out an outline, pop back up. But in being in the neighborhood, I realized that there was a lot of gossip. And gossip is used as a way to police people's behavior, to control people's behavior, and that became one of the themes that I became really attracted to. And the one thing about gossip is, you're never sure if it's true, if it's exaggerated. Usually it's exaggerated. Some are complete lies, and that became sort of the heart of the script in some way, in that it's partly exaggerated, partly over the top, but that's just the spirit of the place, and that's just how the oral storytelling, or that's just how it is, and that became a part of it became an important theme of the film. And then beyond that, it became apparent that people had two layers to them. One was the true selves, but the other was the social mask that they had to put on, and you have to put on with various people to varying degrees. And that relationship between oneself and the masked persona that you have to put on became also a very interesting thing for me. So
it's interesting hearing you talk about both those two films. Is you've mentioned the idea of doing research and going to the location. So do you think that sense of place and kind of embedding yourself in that sense of place is important to you in your work? Can you talk maybe a little bit more about what location means to you in that sense of place?
I mean, it's crucial for me. I had a funny relationship with this, because I approached the film at first in the same way that we did Deep, which was, this authenticity was a primary goal, and so on. And after a few drafts, I struggled with that. Maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but I had to own the film. I had to move past that, because I was so I clung on to this idea so strongly after Deep, because it worked so well there, that I had to let go of it again, and then bring in elements of myself, which are the films I enjoy, films of the 90s, the genre films that we used to get in the Middle East. And once I accepted that this was going to be a blend of research and authenticity, or based on these things that I had done research on, but also my own filmic interests at the time, which isn't so long ago, but that became a blend of both the location. And then the other important thing about the location is, beyond the film, just the community that helped us out in making the film possible. This is a relationship that, again, we built over years, and they're involved in various aspects of the film. Obviously, most closely my friend Mahmoud in the writing and development, but beyond that, in the locations and the production and the casting and so on and so forth. And even when we're filming on set, we're getting suggestions here and there for any tweaks, or if I needed to particular turn a phrase that I wasn't used to hearing, or so the location is important, both behind the scenes and for the research and all of that.
So you sort of touched on this a little bit in terms of bringing in those personal genre influences and stuff.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is quite interesting, I think, about the Alice is, in a way, it's very specific to that location. It's very kind of specific to Jordan, you could say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it feels very universal in terms of kind of its themes, and particularly its relationship to genre cinema. So I was wondering if that's something that you were kind of conscious of, if that was deliberate, that you didn't want something too specific, or you wanted to make it more universal, or whether that was kind of organic So I don't know if you can maybe say a
Right.
bit more about that, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense because I mean, in writing, you're always aware of how audience are gonna read certain things or how they're gonna connect with something, because there are some things that came up in the research that were just hard to explain to an audience in a brief period of time. But what I think is at the heart of that is there's, I think, the concept of being scrutinized by society or family, or being really pressured by that, or is something quite universal. It's specific in the way it happens in Jordan. So I think creating an empathy, or creating an understanding of that is easy, because people generally know how that is. But where it becomes specific is how the characters react to it. So it's sort of an obstacle that we all know in some way or form, and we've all tasted in some way or form. And then the way it gets specific is how these characters, which again, it's a lot of this derived from some of the research, is how that happens very specifically in that kind of neighborhood.
And to kind of pull you back to discussions of genre a little bit. I mean, we were talking in the bar just now about how, as filmmakers, it's very frustrating when people sort of try and pigeonhole certain work into certain genre. But I'm interested in the way that you have a rich character study, but kind of frame that within generic conventions, let's say. And were you thinking about genre as you made it? Were you kind of, were there specific films or directors that influenced you, or were you one of these writers that kind of said, okay, I'm going to write down the codes of this genre, and I'm going to make sure that I tick these off in my screenplay?
No, not at all. I don't know that I had a specific genre when I set out to do the film. Again, the initial drafts were an attempt to be hyper authentic that didn't quite work. And I found that the films that most ended up influencing me, I think, on the Coen brothers films, particularly Fargo, for me, the multi-character thing, the larger than life characters, even the wardrobes a bit. I don't want to say theatrical, but it's a bit grand. The characters are real characters. And the other, I think, would be potentially Bong Joon-ho, and specifically The Host. I still am. I love The Host as far as it's a genre film that balances this, dark creature film, but also has a very comic element to it. And I think Tutu's character specifically is very much derived from that type of humor. Maybe if you look at Abbas and something as these grand characters, that's a little more Coen-esque. Again, all based on people that are real, but it allowed me to just be a little more playful with it.
And I mean, I remember when I first saw it, kind of commenting to you about the genre threads and the dramatic tension, but also picking up on your characters and how you all felt. But I felt that the characters in this are really rich, and they're very kind of three-dimensional, and that's what gives the film its real emotional pull. And I think a big part of that, possibly as well as the great writing, is also the casting. I thought that the film was particularly well cast, not just acted, but somehow cast. You feel that the people really kind of inhabit and live those roles. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your character development and also the casting process.
Sure. As far as character development, I think this goes back to this first concept, is I really wanted to make sure to give them the layer of who the character is internally, and what is this mask that they're putting on society, and how does this come to the forefront of their conflict at some point. So for example, Abbas and the gangster, and his strongest weapon is potentially his tongue, and taking that away and seeing what is he beyond that, and Ali's life is obviously a lie, and Lana to a certain extent, and so it's all rooted in all of that, the development. As far as casting, I think there isn't a plethora of actors to cast from in the Middle East, or in Jordan specifically, and so I was limited in who I could reach. So I'm really happy that each of the characters really were filled, I think, to the fullest. And I think there was some form of adapting the character on the page to the actor who eventually came. I think it's a natural part of the process, and actors come in and they take the character in one, it leans a little more one way or leans a little more another. Abbas, for example, comes from Egyptian studio productions that are usually, well, I don't want to generalize, but there's some big acting there, right? So but the role needed this big acting. So working with him was about bringing him down, because we still needed the grandness there. Ali's character needed a more subtle, natural thing, and Imad brought that. Maisa, who plays Hanadi, Abbas's right-hand man, the female gangster, she usually gets roles that are romantic or oppressed women in the Middle East and so on and so forth. So she was really excited to hear that this was a potential role. And when she sent the audition tape, it was perfect, because it's really difficult to find somebody to who's able to get the accent right, which is something I don't know, most here you won't notice that, but making sure that it works for a local audience, and it is a genre film that sorry, going back to genre film, I'll go back to that later, but making sure it works for local audiences, because it is an audience film, and having that ferociousness and accepting to do that role is, there weren't many people. So when she sent the audition tape, I was just, this is her. She's perfect. And I think Tutu was the only character who, in the writing, I knew would be him. He's the drunk husband, and just had something about his physicality that I think is very special and unique to him.
So I'm going to just ask one or two more questions, and then I'll open it up, so if anyone has any, can start thinking about that. So when we first met, which would have been, I think, 2016, something like that, you were still writing the script. And I remember at the time that you were looking a lot at multi-character films and multi-strand character films. And it seems like, from talking to you about some of your other projects, that this is something that kind of recurs throughout your work. Not so much in Thief, which I guess is slightly more anchored on a central character, but I'm interested in, with the Ali's, sort of how you came to that decision to have, because it seemed like that was a very important part right from the conception. So, but to have that kind of multi-character perspective rather than a single character that pulls us into this world and then shows us around that world. Can you maybe talk a bit about that decision?
I think what attracts me to films generally are worlds. So with Thief, that was the world of the desert, the world of the Bedouin, and so on and so forth. And with this, the world was naturally multi-character. You had all of these. It's a beehive of people, and that's what really attracted me. So I knew at the get-go that this needed to be a multi-character film. And but as I developed, the character of Ali became so central to me that he sort of, he essentially takes over the first half, and that, even though it's not exactly at the point, but that decision to sort of kill him off, I think, allowed the film to become a real multi-character film. So it allowed these other, at some point, side characters really take over and fill the screen for the second half. So I think for me, that was essential, because I'm attracted to a world and to the relationship of characters to one another and how it dominoes because it's claustrophobic. One person's action will domino into another, will domino into another, and so on and so forth. And in doing the research, some of these stories really were just absurd and wild, and I think that's something that I wanted to pull into this film. Is just how,
So you talk again about stories and putting them in. So would you say that a lot of the material in the film is based on real stories that you heard and that you pulled in?
I'd say, well, it's threads here and there. So the character of Ali is based on a real person. The character of Abbas is definitely based on a real person in the neighborhood who became friends with the actor and was really happy to, it's not, he doesn't know it's based on him, but we pull a little bit from here and there. Maisa's character, who is Hanadi, she's based on an amalgam of 4 or 5 different um, female gangsters in Jordan. The Lana Ali relationship is based on many stories of forbidden love in the Middle East, so there are particular ones as well. Asil, the strong mother trying to protect her daughter, is is something that we don't see as much in Middle Eastern cinema, but it's definitely something that exists in the Middle East, and Tutu as well, based on amalgam of characters from that same neighborhood. So, and as far as some of the stories, yes, I'd say some of it is based on it, but eventually, I think the second half of the film, as the stories evolve and grow, obviously the voyeurism is there's plenty of that, and the blackmailing, but as the stories domino off each other, there is some of that, not in the specific way that it happens here, but so it's just taking all of these little ideas and then seeing, okay, so what if we put this character with that character, what happens, and then the script took a life of its own eventually. But yeah, the seeds are all in reality.
Final question before I open it up. Have you shown the film in the neighborhood and see these people that you're talking about, and how did they react to it?
It was great. Yeah, so our Jordanian premiere, we didn't show it in the neighborhood because there isn't really the space to do that, but we booked the cinema and we invited them all over, and yeah, they loved it. I mean, a lot of the extras were there, so they were happy specifically to see themselves, but beyond that, to see their contributions to the film, and it felt like they had a sense of ownership to it. Yeah, I was worried because to me that was out of all audiences who've seen the film, that was the one I was most worried about, because you're entrusted with this, you work on it for so long, and then for most people, actually for most of the crew, they have no idea how the edit is going or how what sort of music, and they just come in, and the premiere is always a funny thing, because you want the crew to be proud of it, and so it went well.
Okay, are there any questions from the audience? I think it's
fantastic. I mean, I did read a very early draft back in around 2016. I did read an early draft around 2016, and I'm so impressed as to how you've really taken each of those characters and developed them. But also the new character of the barber, the barber who then came at the end, as a sort of a Robin Hood and brought, if you like, some. Yes, at what stage of the development did the barber appear? Or start to become?
That's a good question. I think there's 3 phases in the writing of this script. I think the first one, which is the first draft, which is the one you had read as a part of the Yahweh, and that was still, I think, trying to base it on something, but not really having navigated the world so much. And then I had the second, third, and fourth draft, which, in doing research, I was very obsessed with making it hyper real. Just never really worked. And then I think that character specifically came about in the fifth draft, when I accepted that I have to make this film my own beyond the research, and so he to me is a sort of the romantic character of the the person who cares about his friend's reputation. He's not he's not acting. His actions aren't admirable, but the reason he's doing them is, so it's sort of, he gets, in a way, he also gets sucked into that, but he gets sucked into it for the right reasons. So yeah, he didn't, there was sort of a real jump between the fourth draft and the fifth draft that completely, allowed it to be allowed me to have a little more fun with it, let's say. Yeah.
I'm interested, you mentioned a few times this idea of this hyper-real version of the film. I'm interested if you can explain, if it's not too complicated, what that looks like. Because the film is many things, but hyperrealism is not one of them, I would
No.
posit. So I'm interested just to kind of why you stepped away from that and kind of potentially what that actually looked like.
Yeah, I mean, I think the film, it's such a big part of the identity of this film that it's hard to go back and think of and look at the old drafts and just think. So it had some of the characters, and then there were a couple of characters that were taken away, but it was just more of a, I don't know if you've seen the film Neighboring Sounds, the Brazilian one. A bit like that, but the characters were still intertwined and they still dominoed off one another, but it wasn't really, it didn't really, I mean, it may have worked if I showed, I don't know, but there's something about, just looking at the script, something about it just didn't feel full, and, that version, I have to be honest, I'm still curious about. I don't know, I'm not going to do it, but I am just gutturally curious as to what it would have been if the approach was to maintain that. But yeah.
More questions from the audience?
You mentioned quite frequently about about this authenticity and about this hyper realism that you initially wanted to instill within the film. To my knowledge, you were also the director and writer of this film, so you kind of wore different hats. I'm curious, in terms of recognizing that this hyper realism wasn't viable in how the film was progressing and how the film was shaping up, which hat, let's say, were you wearing when you realized this? Did you realize that it wasn't working from a writing point of view, or did you realize it was not working from a directorial standpoint, or would you say it was a mixture of the two?
No, it's definitely in the writing that I realized that this wasn't working. And perhaps it is because I'm writing with the idea that I will be directing, having that in mind. But I think something about the way the relationships sort of didn't come together the way I had hoped they would in the earlier drafts, in the authentic version. I mean, hyper is not hyper, but in the more. It just didn't quite work, and I think, again, I mentioned this, but I think allowing myself to just have fun with, I suddenly had this well of material, obviously, from, all these little stretches that I had doing research and doing various writing, but I had the well was there, the stories were there. It was just about looking at it with a different lens, and as soon as I had a little fun with it, it just sort of worked.